Good day and greetings from the Great White North. My name is Prickly Poo and welcome to day 201 of a year of change. I don't know if you can hear this. We're going to start things off on a sour note because if you can't hear that, there is a guy hammering his car outside. So, sorry for the noise. It's going to be annoying. He's been going for about half an hour. It's 8 in the morning. And when I'm done this, I'm going to go and punch him in the dick. Because you shouldn't be hammering at 8 in the morning. It's fine. I know that people work different shifts and everything else. So it's, it doesn't really matter what time you're doing something because you're going to interrupt someone's sleep. But no matter who you are, don't start doing this shit at 8 in the morning. Oh, I thought he stopped for a second. Yeah. Don't start doing this shit at 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning. Because then you disturb everybody. Anyway. Today, we're going to sort of get back on track to what we've been doing. I still have something in my eye. There we go. And sorry, you're going to have to deal with the banging, because I've been dealing with it for quite some time. And just before he started recording, he stopped, and I thought, finally, okay, things are good. And started right back up again. So, I don't know, it's in my elbow. My finger. There we go. All right. Anyway, we're sort of getting back on track to concentrating on sugar this week. And we had mentioned last week, and this is one of those things that, you hear all the time, that, oh, sugar's addictive, sugar's addictive. We know that it is. Just for ourselves, when we start eating cookies and cakes and candies and stuff like that, where we really don't have that off button, it's much more difficult to try to curb those snacks than there are for other things, for some of us anyway. But it's one of those things that people sort of flippantly say, and they're like, oh, I'm just addicted to this or addicted to that. But the thing is, sugar actually does have a lot of addictive properties. And there's a study that was famously done back in 2008 where they took rats and basically gave them a choice between sugar water or cocaine. And they rewarded them exactly the same for each one. They did a whole bunch of things. And it was one of those things that, people much brighter than I am took into account pretty much everything. Saying, okay, well, how addictive is cocaine to a rat compared to sugar? Is that comparable to how addictive it is to a human? Is this sort of, are they hardwired to get addicted to one thing more than another? And all things being considered, they went, good enough, we're going to level the playing field, and do the study. And what they found is that when it came to, choosing between sugar and cocaine, the rats chose sugar almost every single time. It was a huge number. I want to say it's in the 90s. It might actually have been almost 100%. And actually, I'm trying to think, I didn't do my research. Anyway, it was one of those things that they had a choice between, and the reward was exactly the same, just basically that rush of sugar or the rush of cocaine. But when they had the choice between the two, they would always take sugar. And, you can sort of look at it and think, well, yes, but they're rats, and, the flavor is part of it, and, everything else. But when you just look at the addictive properties of it, the fact that they're taking a flavor of something over the actual effect of something, it doesn't really account for it. And they did actually take that into account. They sort of looked at everything and said, okay, well, we need to make sure that really the only thing that's going to be affecting them is the brain chemistry. That between the two of them, everything else needs to pretty much be identical. So I don't know if they flavored the cocaine or they just gave them better cocaine pills or sugar pills or whatever it was. Anyway, the point being that the hammering is driving me nuts. It's really distracting, and I really, really want to go yell at him and scream at him, but he has a hammer, so I don't know if that's the wisest thing to do. Anyway, we're pretty much the same way. Not that there are some of us out there that are going, oh, well, you can cure cocaine addiction by having Smarties. You can't, I don't think. Probably can't. But there are a lot of us out there that are the way that we are because of an addiction to food. And we sort of addressed that before, showing that it's just a lot of it isn't really the same thing as being, physically dependent on something. A lot of what we do is emotional, whether it's, when we've had a bad day, when we're depressed, when we're lonely, when we're sad, doesn't matter what the situation is. We tend to go towards food as that comfort. And the problem is that once you make that connection, once your brain links that up, then everything that we eat becomes a comfort. So then it's just, we just eat to stay comfortable, and then, or to stay mentally satisfied is probably a better way to put it, which just leads us into this lifestyle that we've sort of become accustomed to, where everything that we do is dependent and surrounding upon food. Surrounding upon? That doesn't make any sense. Dependent upon food and surrounding food. That sounds better. See, now I'm going to blame the hammer for this because I'm still like blah, 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 all over the place. But I do that anyway when it's perfectly quiet. So, anyway. But when it comes to sugar, especially where we're sort of focusing on this for the next 2 or 3 weeks, there is something else that happens. It's not just that emotional dependence that we get, the same way that we would with regular food. There is something in your brain that is hardwired to seek it out. And it's because it's very, quick energy. There's really not a lot to it. It's, again, one of those evolutionary things. We talked about this a long time ago, showing why we crave the foods that we crave, things that are high in salt and fat and sugar and everything else. Because when you do eat that, it's, evolutionarily speaking, of course, it is a very rare thing. So eating something with lots of sugar would be something that's very, very rare. And when you do that, then you make that connection. You get the high energy, very quick bursts. You can store fat with it, so that, and this is going way, way back, thousands and thousands of years. Or for some of you, 2,000 years, which doesn't make any fucking sense at all. But for the vast majority of people that know what's going on, it does. It goes way, way back to when we're, not necessarily sitting in caves, because I don't think we ever actually did that. But, back in Neanderthal times, we'll just use that. So, 500,000 years ago. Just having that store of ready energy available to you, it's one of those things, I think, that sort of keeps us hardwired for that. Salt is a bit different. You actually sort of have to develop a taste for it. We do need salt in our diet as well, but we get enough from food regularly that we don't need the added stuff in there. My issue with salt was that I put it on absolutely everything, and it's an acquired taste. I know people sort of say that about stuff that's disgusting, but it's sort of their excuse. Oh, it tastes like shit. Well, it's an acquired taste. No, it tastes like shit. But salt is one of those things that you have to sort of build up that taste for it, where you enjoy it that way. I don't know if it's a matter of being accustomed to it, or if there is that sort of proclivity towards it. But sugar is a bit different. From the moment we're born, then immediately, pretty much every kid across the board likes sugar. We all did. Halloween was the be-all and end-all for every single kid out there, that it's just free candy and you just eat till you got sick. And we've all done it. We've all done it as adults, too. It's not just kids. We've bought the candy and cookies and Twinkies and cakes and everything else, and eaten an entire box. And when we're done, we still just want more. We are hardwired to really, really want sugar. And part of that is because obviously part of that is the taste, but there is something that happens in your brain that it does trigger that, addiction. And not in the same way that regular emotional eating would trigger an addiction. Like, it's not an emotional or psychological dependence. It's an actual physical change. It's an actual physical dependence that you get on for it, and it follows you. I still know people that really they understand that if they sort of start in on the candy, then they're not going to stop. And much like the salt, like to this point, that doesn't make sense either. I'm all over the place. Because in my head, all I can hear is... Anyway, when it comes to salt, for example, that's something that your palate can change. I've stopped putting extra salt on the majority of my food. Every now and then I'll put in, 1 or 2 turns of my grinder, just because it obviously needs salt, but not to the same extent. Oh, he stopped. No, he didn't. Fuck. Not to the same extent that I was before, where I was putting, probably at least a teaspoon on pretty much everything. But there is that, you do develop that taste for it where you really, really want it. With sugar, it's a bit different. Pretty much across the board, everyone likes it. So you can say, well, I'm addicted to salty snacks or cheesy snacks or whatever it is, but inevitably it gets to a point where your body can just go, well, you've adjusted to that, you've had enough, and either whether because it's too salty, or you've had it. But with sugar, it's a bit different because you want to keep eating. Plus, it doesn't really satisfy you because it doesn't have anything to it. The more sugar that you eat, the hungrier that you get. Not entirely. It's not going on forever. Eventually, you will get full of Smarties, but it's a bit different because it's not really a flavor thing. I mean, that is part of it, but there's a physiological change that goes along with it. And sort of getting back to the study with the rats, they really did show that it's more than simply just saying, well, your body needs it. Because we will continue to eat it long after our body is done needing it, when obviously, with the majority of us, we live sedentary lives. We sit for our job. We sit when we're watching TV. We sit when we're just trying to relax. But then the rest of the time, we're sleeping. So when you're just eating loads and loads and loads of sugar, then your body doesn't have anywhere to put it. So it transfers it to glycogen, or what's that word? Is it the word I'm looking for? Transfers? No, not really. Converts. There we go. Converts. It converts it to glycogen. Converts it to glycogen. Oh, God, I can't talk it all. And then it stores it as fat. There's nowhere else for it to go. Because we are burning it off immediately, then it needs to be stored. Which is, again, part of the reason why we said stay away from the low-fat and, fat-free stuff, because it's just a bunch of sugar, which is just going to get converted into fat anyway. So there's really no need for us to continually eat a tremendous amount of sugar, because our body doesn't need it. But for some reason, when we do eat it, we want more. And, I mean, candy companies know this, so no one ever just has 3 or 4 Smarties. Immediately, you just want, I want more. I just want more, and you want to keep eating and eating and eating until your stomach is actually full, more than actually your brain just saying, that's enough sugar, you don't need any more. I mean, there are some times where we've had so much, the icing story comes to mind, where, that's actually a prime example, where when you're eating so much of it that you need a drink because there's so much sugar. It's just saturating your pores. It's just everywhere. And the icing actually is a good point to bring up, because it's one of those things that when I did it, there was no... I mean, you don't think that it's not... Obviously, it's not a normal thing to sit and eat a tub of icing. A tub. But... It's one of those things that you think, there's no nutritional value to it whatsoever. There's no... when you're craving something, when you're craving a steak, it's usually because you need something, and somewhere down the line, your body knows that meat has what it needs, whether it's protein or iron or whatever it is that you need. Whatever you're craving at the time, that's usually part of it. Not always. Sometimes it's just a matter of, I just really want a steak. But a lot of it is just that, there's something that your body needs that type of food has. So if you're craving, an apple or an orange or something, there's probably some sugar or acid or vitamins or something in there that you need. When you crave sugar, though, there's nothing in there. It doesn't contribute anything. And so it's purely just a flavor thing. And then on top of that, you do have this change going on in your brain where it is an addiction, and it looks exactly the same as cocaine or heroin or cigarettes or anything else. There is that addiction in there, and it's a physical addiction. And it's one of those things, again, not to sort of be an alarmist and say, oh, God, we can't have any sugar anymore because now you're an addict. We all are at some point. At some level, we all are. And not just us, but even thin people. So don't worry. You're not alone in this. It's just the way that our bodies handle sugar. And whether it's a psychological thing that you have, or whether it's just a flavor thing, or whether it's the actual addiction of it, it is something that affects us. So I mean, I have 2 or 3 different links I'm going to put down below, just sort of touching on all these as well. I'm going to put a link down there with the actual study that they did with the rats. And I'm pretty sure it was back in 2008. It was quite a while ago that they did this. And the reward system was essentially, everything was equalized, and they said, it doesn't matter what it is, we're just comparing the sugar and the cocaine. Everything else is the same, so there isn't any, trigger that's going to say, well, something better happens with this. There isn't anything that says, this is bitter, this is better. Anyway, they really did sort of make it as even as they possibly could, so that the only thing that was going to be affecting them was the mental and physical change and the addiction to the drug. And they've also looked at this, obviously, because you're going, well, that's a rat. That's not really a human being. It may be a little bit different. It really isn't. They have shown that, the same thing happens with us. We get that craving, and then once it's somewhat satisfied, but it never really goes away. I mean, it's one of those things that you can't really just sort of start in, and just spit on myself. You can't really start in and say, there, that's enough sugar, I'm good, and then be good for a week. And we obviously know this. We've gone through this for the past 6 months. I'm not even a real sugar person, but even then, there's still that, I want some candy, I want some gummies, or I want something else, chocolates, I'll say. Not a fan of chocolate. But something sugary. There's always that craving there. And it's one of the few cravings that really is always there. And it's not super, super severe. It's not something that we would say, every single day that you have the shakes and you have to go to a clinic and you have to say, I got to get my fix. But it's one of those things that it doesn't matter where you are. If you had a handful of candy, you're probably going to eat it. Or at the very least, you're going to think, oh, that would be really good to have. Whether or not you actually eat it, that's always there. There are times when you think, I don't really want anything salty and I don't feel like having anything savory. But if there are little chocolate macaroons there, everyone's like, yes, I'm going to have one because they're great. So it's one of those things to sort of keep in mind. It's not really any news per se. It's not anything that we aren't really aware of. And for a lot of us, we know that we've always called it an addiction, but now you have scientific proof that it actually is an addiction. It's not just us being fat and not being able to stop eating. It's, there is something that goes on there. Now, again, this isn't laying blame. This isn't the same. There is something to take into account here that these are rats. And although there's a physical addiction to something, people that are addicted to cocaine and heroin and everything else, they can still get help. They still kick that habit. So it's not like you can say, I'm helpless. It's a sugar addiction and I'm powerless against it. There's nothing I can do. There is. It's much easier for us as adults to just say, no, I'm not going to eat that. Or I'm going to have some of that. But, so there is that to take into account as well. So this isn't a matter of going, oh, look, it's not your fault because it's an addiction. The whole food thing is an addiction as well, but we still have that control. It's still our choice to go out and buy that and, gorge ourselves on it. But anyway, the hammering thing is really driving me nuts. I don't know if you can hear it or not. I'm going to try to take it out of the sound as much as I can. But if it has bothered you throughout the entire thing, I am sorry. But I'm going to I don't know what I'm going to do. He's going to end up in the paper tomorrow if he doesn't shut the fuck. It's been almost an hour now of non-stop hammering. And I don't know what he's doing to his car. Whatever it is, it's wrecked. If he's trying to loosen something, it's not coming off. It's been non-stop. Steady going for 50 minutes, roughly. Anyway, so I'm going to put some links down in the description below, just to sort of touch on a few of these things, including the actual study that they did with the rats, comparing the cocaine and the sugar. So you can go in, you can take a look. It's a little more scientific than just going, oh, a mouse has sugar. Neat. But it gives you a little bit of information, and any information pretty much is good, where you can look at it and say, okay, you know what, it's not an excuse, it's not, a way to say, well, it's an addiction, I can't help myself, this is why I keep eating this stuff. But it might give you a little bit of insight as to why we have such a hard time giving up the sugar more than the salt, and not so much the fat, because we've been replacing those, But why it's so hard to give up the cakes and the cookies and the gummies and the jujubes and all the other little chocolate bonbons that we eat. Bonbons? I've never used that word before in my life. I don't know why I use that now. Hobnobs. There we go. Chocolate hobnobs. I think I showed you those before. It's why, it might give you a little bit of an idea as to why it's so difficult to get rid of those. That right from the second that we're born, we all like it. Unless you have a weird taste bud thing, in which case you don't like sugar or you can't smell anything, in which case you probably can't taste anything. So, unless, if you're like that, then you're probably having an easier time than we are. But for the vast majority of us, it's one of those things that right from the moment we're born, sugar tastes good. And we get hooked at a very young age. And as they say, cigarette companies did this. You get them at the young age, and you've got them forever. So it is going to be really difficult for a lot of us just to sort of curb that sugar. But again, we are replacing some of it with healthier options, going to more fruit and vegetables and stuff like that, rather than just the empty sugar calories. And I know that your body treats it the exact same way. But when you're looking at your sugar levels this week, when we get to the end of the week and we sort of add things up, we're trying to cut back a little bit. Take it in perspective, the fact, the source. If you've cut back 10% and your source is exactly the same, that's still progress. If you're still roughly at the same spot, but it's not entirely your cookies and cakes that you've been eating, you've added in more fruits and things like that, it's still good. If you've, cut way back, or if you've sort of gained and you've eaten more, but you've cut out all cookies and cakes and candies and everything else, which is insane, but bravo, it's still good, because the sources of the sugar right now for what we're doing is a little more important than the actual level of the sugar. So if you have your choice between having 4 grams of sugar in a cookie or 16 grams of sugar in an apple, and you're taking the apple, then we're okay to deal with the sugar that way. So anyway, I'm going to stop this video here and go beat someone up. But in the meantime, thank you very much for watching. If you liked it, please poke the like button for me. In the meantime, keep yourself warm and fuzzy, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.